That night at the dance club was supposed to be a celebration, a chance to rebuild what had been crumbling. But as I stood there, watching Michelle take another man's hand and walk onto the dance floor, something inside me broke. It wasn't just the act. It was the defiance in her eyes, the dismissal of my pain, the way she chose a stranger's fleeting attention over the years we had built together. Her so-called innocent dance was the final straw. I walked out into the cold night, the sounds of music fading behind me, and made the hardest decision of my life. Was this the end of our marriage? Or could we find our way back to each other? But before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're enjoying the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Errol, a dedicated man in his late 30s, prides himself on being a loving husband and father. With nearly 12 years of marriage behind him, he shares a home with his wife Michelle and their vibrant 8-year-old daughter, Margaret. Their life, nestled in a modest suburban neighborhood, appears picture-perfect. The house, while not extravagant, is warm and inviting, with a backyard that Margaret often turns into her playground. 2 reliable cars sit in the driveway, reflecting their hard-earned stability. By most standards, they are a comfortable middle-class family. As the head of the household, Carroll takes his role seriously. His days are filled with the demands of work, where he spends long hours ensuring his family's needs are met. Although his job doesn't leave room for indulgence, it provides a steady income, enough for occasional splurges like family outings or gifts for Margaret. Michelle, who once described him as her rock, often managed the home front with grace and efficiency. Together, they have built a life that, at least on the surface, feels steady and secure. However, beneath this facade of normalcy, Carroll has begun to sense cracks forming. In the quiet moments after a long day, he notices an unsettling shift in Michelle's demeanor. She seems distant, preoccupied, as if a weight he can't see is pulling her away. While Margaret's laughter fills the house with life, it's becoming harder for Carroll to ignore the growing silence between him and his wife. Conversations that once flowed naturally now feel stilted, and small moments of connection are fewer and farther between. As Carroll reflects on these changes, he clings to hope. He believes in the foundation they've built, and is determined to find a way back to the life they once shared. What he doesn't yet realize is that this journey will test not only his patience and resolve, but also the depth of their love and commitment. At first, Carroll dismissed the nagging feeling in the back of his mind, attributing Michelle's behavior to stress or fatigue. However, as the emotional distance between them grew, doubt began to creep in. It wasn't a single moment, but a series of small, unsettling changes. Michelle's mood swings, her increasingly vague explanations about her day, and the way she seemed distracted even when they were together. All of it felt like pieces of a puzzle Carroll couldn't yet assemble. He hated himself for even entertaining the thought, but the question lingered. Could Michelle be seeing someone else? The idea weighed heavily on him, filling him with an ache that was part fear, part frustration. Carroll replayed their recent interactions, searching for clues. He couldn't shake the memory of her brushing off his affectionate gestures or the nights she claimed to be too tired to talk or connect. Worse, there were moments when Michelle seemed almost defensive, snapping at him over questions as simple as, "How was your day?" Each time, she would dismiss his concern, but her tone left him uneasy. Determined to find clarity, Carroll turned to the internet late one night while Michelle and Margaret slept. He found countless articles outlining the signs of infidelity, each one a checklist that felt uncomfortably familiar. Emotional withdrawal, lack of intimacy. Michelle's recent behavior seemed to align with many of the warning signs. Still, Carroll reminded himself that these lists were not definitive proof. People go through rough patches, he reasoned, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Unable to shake his suspicions, Carroll began to observe Michelle more closely. He noticed she occasionally left the house during the day without explaining where she had been. When he asked, she would reply with vague answers like, "Just running errands," or "I needed some air." Though these outings were brief, they added to the growing tension in Carol's mind. What if she wasn't being entirely truthful? After days of wrestling with his thoughts, Carol decided he needed answers. He felt torn between guilt and desperation as he retrieved an old surveillance camera from the garage. Setting it up discreetly under the eaves of their home, he told himself it wasn't about mistrust, but about finding peace of mind. The camera was connected to a hidden recorder tucked away in a corner of the garage. Every day after work, he would review the footage, his heart racing as he searched for anything out of the ordinary. For 2 weeks, the recordings revealed nothing suspicious. There were no unfamiliar cars pulling into the driveway, no strangers visiting the house. Michelle's brief outings seemed innocuous, a trip to the grocery store, a short walk in the neighborhood. Yet Carol couldn't help but fixate on the fact that she hadn't mentioned these trips to him. It wasn't definitive proof of anything, but it fed his unease. Meanwhile, Michelle noticed the subtle shift in Carol's behavior. She could feel his watchful eyes and sense the growing tension in their interactions. Part of her wanted to confront him, to ask why he seemed so distant. But another part held her back. Deep down, Michelle knew she hadn't been herself. The pressures she couldn't articulate, the monotony of daily life, the creeping sense of dissatisfaction were taking a toll. Yet the guilt of seeing Carol's hurt made her withdraw even further, unsure of how to bridge the gap she had created. Michelle found herself caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. On one hand, she loved Carol deeply and appreciated all he did for their family. On the other, she couldn't deny the emptiness that had crept into her heart. It wasn't about wanting someone else. It was about rediscovering a sense of purpose and identity beyond being a wife and mother. But instead of sharing these feelings with Carol, she bottled them up, convinced he wouldn't understand. For Carol, the lack of evidence from the surveillance camera offered no comfort. If anything, it left him feeling more conflicted. He wanted to believe in Michelle's fidelity, but the unanswered questions gnawed at him. Was she simply better at hiding things than he thought, or was he letting his imagination get the better of him? The uncertainty was unbearable. Late one evening, Carol sat alone in the living room, the weight of his doubts pressing down on him. His mind raced with possibilities, each more painful than the last. He thought of Michelle's warmth during the early years of their marriage, of the nights they stayed up talking about their dreams for the future. The memory of her laughter, once so infectious, now felt like a distant echo. He wanted that Michelle back, the one who had always been his partner, his confidant, his greatest source of joy. As Carol stared at the darkened television screen, he realized he couldn't continue like this. The growing wedge between them wasn't just about what Michelle might or might not be doing. It was about the life they were losing, the connection that was slipping away. He resolved to take action, not out of suspicion, but out of love for the family they had built. Yet, as he would soon discover, the road to clarity would be far more complicated than he anticipated. Carol had spent weeks wrestling with the growing distance between him and Michelle. Determined to salvage what remained of their bond, he decided to plan a special night to celebrate their anniversary. He hoped to rekindle the connection they once shared, to remind Michelle, and himself, of the love that had built their life together. The evening began with a sense of optimism. Carol booked a reservation at Plato's, Michelle's favorite restaurant, known for its intimate atmosphere and impeccable cuisine. As they sat across from each other in the dimly lit room, the tension that had plagued their relationship seemed to lift, if only slightly. They exchanged polite smiles and began to talk. Carol made an effort to steer the conversation toward lighthearted topics: Margaret's latest school project, a funny incident at work, and memories of their early days together. For a while, it worked. Michelle laughed, her smile genuine for the first time in weeks, and Carol felt a glimmer of hope. Over a bottle of wine, their conversation turned playful, and the familiar warmth of their partnership began to resurface. By the time dessert arrived, Carol believed they were on the verge of something meaningful. "Shall we go dancing?" he suggested as they finished their meal. Dancing had always been a shared passion, one that brought them closer during their courtship and the early years of their marriage. Michelle hesitated for a moment, but then agreed, her eyes softening. They decided to visit their favorite dance club, a cozy venue with a nostalgic ambiance and soft lighting. It wasn't trendy or crowded, but it was their space, a place that had always felt like home to them. As they stepped onto the dance floor, Carol took Michelle's hand, guiding her into the rhythm of a slow, romantic song. For a moment, it was as if the world outside didn't exist. They moved together, their bodies in sync, and Carol dared to hope that this night might be the start of something new. But the fragile peace was soon disrupted. Across the room, a man sitting alone at a corner table caught Carol's eye. He was well-dressed, with a confident air that bordered on arrogance. Carol noticed the man's gaze fixed on Michelle, his interest unmistakable. At first, Carol tried to dismiss it, telling himself that strangers often watched others in public spaces. But the longer the man stared, the more uncomfortable Carol became. When the song ended, Michelle excused herself to the restroom. Carol watched her cross the dance floor, her movements graceful and poised. As she disappeared from view, Carol's unease grew. Glancing back at the man, he noticed something that made his chest tighten. The man smirked, as though he knew something Carol didn't. When Michelle returned, her demeanor had shifted slightly. There was a nervous energy about her, one that Carol couldn't quite place. Trying to shake off his discomfort, he offered to get another glass of wine. Michelle nodded, though her impatient glance told him she was growing irritated by his hesitation. As he handed her the wine, the moment he had been dreading unfolded. The stranger from the corner table approached them, exuding confidence. Ignoring Carol entirely, he turned to Michelle and asked, "Care to dance?" Carol's jaw tightened, his pulse quickening. He stood up, his voice firm but steady. "She's my wife. If she wants to dance, she'll dance with me." The man smiled, undeterred. "I was talking to the lady," he replied, his tone dripping with arrogance. He became the topic. Carol's voice hardened. "And I'm telling you, she's with me. Find someone else." Exercise and therapy is a great substitute for medication, but it doesn't fill a void. Before Carol could say more, Michelle intervened. "Carol, you're being rude," she said sharply, her tone carrying an edge he hadn't heard before. Her words stung, cutting deeper than the stranger's smugness. "Rude," Carol thought, incredulous. He stared at her, his voice tight with frustration. "Do you even know this guy?" "No," Michelle replied, brushing off the question. "He's just asking for a dance. It's not a big deal." "It's a big deal to me," Carol shot back. "It's our anniversary. I'm not going to stand here and watch you dance with someone else." Michelle sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin. "You don't own me, Carol. If I want to dance with someone, I will." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Carol took a deep breath, struggling to keep his temper in check. "Michelle," he said quietly, "if you dance with him, I won't be here when you get back." Michelle's eyes flashed with defiance. She hesitated for a moment, but then, with an unsettling calmness, she said, "It's rude to keep this gentleman waiting while we argue." Without another word, she took the stranger's hand and walked toward the dance floor. Carol stood frozen, disbelief washing over him. The sight of Michelle smiling at the stranger, moving with him to the music, felt like a betrayal more profound than words could describe. He couldn't watch any longer. Quietly, Carol left the club, slipping out into the cool night air. As he walked to the car, his mind raced with a mix of anger, humiliation, and heartbreak. This was supposed to be their night, a chance to rebuild what had been breaking between them. Instead, it felt like the final blow. The streets were deserted as the sun had cooled a bit, but Rachel was happy because he felt like the final blow. By the time Carol reached home, his decision was clear. He packed a bag, his movements methodical despite the storm of emotions inside him. As he zipped up his suitcase, he glanced around the bedroom they shared. The space that once felt like a sanctuary. Now, it felt empty, hollow. Carol left a note on the kitchen counter, its message brief but pointed. "I need time. "Don't call me." I think he drove to a nearby motel, the silence of the car ride only amplifying his thoughts. What had gone wrong? Had he pushed her away? Or was this simply who Michelle had become, a stranger to the woman he married? As he checked into the motel, he resolved to stay away until he could figure out what to do next. Meanwhile, back at the club, Michelle was finishing her dance. As the song ended, she turned to thank the stranger, but felt a pang of unease. Something about his smug expression unsettled her. When she returned to their table and found it empty, her heart sank. She scanned the room, hoping to see Carol, but it was clear he had left. Her phone buzzed moments later. Carol's message was blunt. "You crossed the line tonight. Don't expect me to be waiting when you get home." Michelle sat down, her head in her hands, as the weight of her actions began to sink in. For the first time that night, she wondered if she had gone too far, and whether she could fix what she had broken. Carol sat in his car outside a small, nearly deserted cafe, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The manila envelope from the private investigator rested on the passenger seat, its edges slightly crumpled from his restless handling. He had driven here to avoid the distractions of home, or, more accurately, the emptiness it had become without Michelle's presence. His heart was pounding as he stepped inside, the soft chime of the doorbell doing little to ease his nerves. The cafe was quiet, save for the faint clinking of cups and a low hum of background music. Carol ordered a coffee, though he doubted he would drink it, and took a seat in a corner booth. The envelope felt heavier than it should, a physical representation of the doubts and fears that had plagued him for weeks. He hesitated, staring at the seal as if it might contain not just answers, but the key to salvaging what remained of his marriage. Finally, he tore it open, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a concise report, typed neatly on crisp white paper. As he began to read, his pulse quickened. Ere a thorough investigation, this office has found no evidence to support the client's suspicions of infidelity on the part of his spouse. The words hit him like a sudden gust of wind, leaving him momentarily breathless. He read the sentence again, then again, as if trying to ensure it was real. The report went on to detail Michelle's daily activities: grocery shopping, visits to a local park, errands that seemed entirely ordinary. There were no secret meetings, no suspicious phone calls, no hidden lover. Relief washed over him, but it was not the kind of triumphant relief he had imagined. Instead, it was muted, almost hollow. If Michelle wasn't unfaithful, then why had she grown so distant? Why did her eyes, once so full of warmth, now seem guarded and cold? Carol stared at the paper, his coffee untouched, feeling a mix of gratitude and confusion. The clarity he sought was only half-formed. He had found an answer, but not an explanation. As the tension ebbed from his body, he folded the report carefully and slid it back into the envelope. He stayed seated for a while longer, staring out the window at the gray afternoon sky. His mind drifted to memories of Michelle, her laughter on their wedding day, the way she had looked at him when they first brought Margaret home from the hospital. Those moments felt like fragments of another life, one he wasn't sure he could ever reclaim. Meanwhile, across town, Michelle stood in the living room, a photo album open on the coffee table in front of her. She had stumbled upon it while tidying up and had spent the last hour flipping through its pages. The photos told the story of their life together: birthdays, vacations, holidays spent laughing and holding each other close. Her eyes lingered on one photo in particular: Carol, cradling a baby Margaret in his arms, his face lit with pure joy. The sight tugged at something deep within her, and she felt a pang of guilt. How had they drifted so far from those moments? She traced her finger over Carol's face in the picture, remembering the way he used to look at her, as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. Michelle sat back on the couch, her thoughts spiraling. At first she had blamed their tension on external pressures, the monotony of daily life, the demands of raising a child. the exhaustion that seemed to creep in more often as the years passed. But as she replayed their recent arguments, she couldn't ignore the truth staring back at her. Carol had been trying. His efforts to reconnect, to show her he still cared, had been constant. She had been the one pulling away. Her mind wandered to the look in Carol's eyes the night at the dance club. It wasn't just anger she had seen there. It was pain. The memory of him walking out, his shoulders slumped in defeat, left her heart aching. She realized, with startling clarity, that she had let her frustrations and insecurities cloud her judgment. It wasn't Carol who had neglected their marriage, it was her. And then she realized that Carol's rejections and insecurities cloud her judgment. It was her. Michelle's gaze drifted to the shelf above the fireplace, where their wedding photo was framed. She walked over, lifting the frame and staring at the younger versions of themselves, their smiles wide and their eyes brimming with hope. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped appreciating the man who had stood beside her through every challenge, who had worked tirelessly to build the life they shared. She sank back onto the couch, tears spilling over as she whispered, "I'm sorry." The words were meant for Carol, though he wasn't there to hear them. Michelle wiped her eyes, determined to make things right. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her actions. She had taken Carol for granted, ignored her efforts, and allowed her own doubts to create a rift between them. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains, Michelle resolved to do whatever it took to repair their relationship. She couldn't change the past, but she could fight for their future, for the family they had built, and the love they once shared. It wouldn't be easy, but as she placed the photo album back on the shelf, she knew one thing for certain. Carol deserved better, and she was ready to give it to him. Back at the cafe, Carol finally stood, clutching the envelope tightly. He still didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. He couldn't give up. Not yet. Whether Michelle was willing to meet him halfway remained to be seen, but as he stepped outside into the crisp air, he allowed himself a small, fragile hope that they could find their way back to each other. The soft hum of an espresso machine and the faint clinking of ceramic cups filled the air at a quiet cafe tucked away on a side street. Michelle sat across from Sophia at a small, round table by the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. Despite the peaceful setting, Michelle's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her mug. She had agreed to meet Sophia to talk, but now that the moment had come, the weight of her confession made her throat tighten. Sophia, her longtime friend, noticed the unease in Michelle's posture, the way her shoulders seemed to carry an invisible burden. She reached across the table, gently placing her hand over Michelle's. "Take your time," Sophia said softly. "Whatever it is, I'm here." Michelle nodded, her eyes lowering to the table, as if afraid to meet her friend's gaze. After a deep breath, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, there's something I need to tell you, something I haven't even admitted to Carol." Sophia straightened slightly, sensing the gravity of the moment. She remained quiet, letting Michelle find her words. "There was a time," Michelle started, her voice breaking, "when I let myself get too close to someone who wasn't my husband." Sophia's brow furrowed, but she didn't interrupt. Michelle took another deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she continued. "His name was Austin," she said, her tone filled with a mix of regret and vulnerability. "It started so innocently. We met at the grocery store, of all places, and struck up a conversation while waiting in line. He was charming, confident, and there was something about the way he looked at me that made me feel seen. At the time, I didn't realize how much I'd been craving that." Sophia tilted her head, her expression a blend of curiosity and concern. "Did anything happen?" she asked gently. Michelle shook her head quickly, her hands tightening around her mug. "No, not physically," she said firmly. "But emotionally. I let myself go too far. We exchanged numbers. We met for coffee a couple of times. He'd compliment me, make me laugh, and I started looking forward to those moments more than I should have. Her voice faltered and she looked up at Sophia, her eyes brimming with tears. I knew it was wrong, Sophia. I knew it even then. But in those moments, I felt alive in a way I hadn't for so long. Carol and we'd been drifting apart, and I'd convinced myself that what I was doing wasn't really cheating because it wasn't physical. Sophia reached for her friend's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. But you felt guilty anyway, she said softly. Michelle nodded, her tears spilling over. Every time I came home and saw Carol, the guilt was unbearable. He's been nothing but good to me, Sophia. He's worked so hard for our family, and I repaid him by letting someone else occupy space in my heart. She paused, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. Austin started suggesting things, meeting in more private places, spending more time together. I think he wanted more, but I couldn't do it. I ended it before it went any further. Sophia exhaled, her relief evident. You did the right thing, Michelle. It's not too late to make things right with Carol. Michelle's gaze fell to the table again, her voice filled with regret. The thing is, even though I stopped seeing Austin, the damage was already done. Not just to Carol, but to me. I let myself believe that my dissatisfaction was because of him, because he wasn't enough. But the truth is, it was me. I stopped appreciating him. I stopped appreciating everything we had. Sophia tilted her head, listening intently as Michelle continued, her voice trembling. There were moments I thought I needed a change, something or someone new to shake me out of my rut. But I've realized now, the only change I needed was in how I saw the person right in front of me, the man who stood by me through everything. Sophia's eyes softened, her hand still resting on Michelle's. That's a powerful realization, Michelle, and it takes a lot of courage to admit that. Michelle offered a faint smile through her tears. I've learned the hard way that emotional infidelity is just as damaging as the physical kind. The lines blur so easily, and before you know it, you're questioning everything you've built. But I don't want to lose Carol. I love him and I can't imagine my life without him. I've hurt him enough already, and it's time I start showing him just how much he means to me. Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. You're right, Michelle. It's so easy to get caught up in what feels exciting or new, but at the end of the day, those things are fleeting. What you and Carol have, that's real. That's worth fighting for. Michelle's grip on her mug relaxed slightly as a sense of determination took hold. Thank you, Sophia, she said, her voice steadier. I needed to say this out loud, to own up to my mistakes, and I needed to remind myself of what truly matters. Sophia smiled warmly. You're stronger than you think, Michelle, and if you're willing to fight for your marriage, I have no doubt you and Carol can find your way back to each other. As they finished their conversation, Michelle felt a weight begin to lift. She wasn't proud of her past choices, but she was ready to take responsibility and rebuild what she had almost lost. With Sophia's support and her newfound resolve, Michelle knew it was time to show Carol and herself that love and commitment were worth every effort. The sun was setting as Carol pulled into the driveway of his home, the familiar silhouette of the house casting long shadows over the yard. He sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The investigator's report had confirmed Michelle's fidelity, but it hadn't erased the lingering doubts or the pain of the past few weeks. His decision to return home was not made lightly. It was a trial, a chance to see if they could rebuild what had been fractured. Inside, Michelle paced nervously in the living room. She had spent the afternoon tidying up, preparing Carol's favorite dinner, and rehearsing what she would say. Yet, as she heard the car door close and his footsteps approach the door, her chest tightened. Would he forgive her? Could they find their way back to each other? The front door creaked open, and their eyes met. "Hi," Michelle said softly, her voice barely audible. She searched his face for clues to his mood, but found only guardedness. "Hi," Carol replied, stepping inside and setting his bag down. The air between them felt heavy, charged with everything left unsaid. He glanced around the room, taking in the familiar surroundings that now felt strangely foreign. "Dinner's ready," Michelle offered, her hands twisting nervously. "I made your favorite lasagna. I thought maybe we could sit and talk." Carol nodded curtly, following her to the dining table. The aroma of freshly baked lasagna filled the room, but he barely noticed. As they sat down, Michelle poured him a glass of wine, her hands trembling slightly. For a few moments, the only sound was the clinking of utensils and the hum of the refrigerator. After a couple of passes around the table, she presented him with a small plate with 2 uninhaled salad grains. Finally, Michelle broke the silence. "Carol, I just want to say how sorry I am," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For being distant, for not listening, for not appreciating you the way I should have. You didn't deserve that, and I know I hurt you." Carol set down his fork, his eyes meeting hers. "You did hurt me, Michelle," he admitted, his tone calm but heavy with pain. "I felt like I lost you, like I wasn't enough for you anymore. And I didn't know how to fix it." Tears welled up in Michelle's eyes. "You are enough, Carol. You've always been enough. I was the one who let my own insecurities get in the way. I let myself drift, and I took you for granted. But I promise you, that's going to change." Carol leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "I want to believe you," he said honestly, "but I can't just forget everything that's happened. It's going to take time for me to trust again." Michelle nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand," she said softly, "and I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I'll prove to you that I'm committed to us, to our family." In the days that followed, Michelle's actions matched her words. She made an effort to show Carol she was serious about repairing their relationship. She left him little notes in his work bag, messages that simply said, "Thinking of you," or "Thank you for coming home." She started cooking his favorite meals more often, inviting him to sit with her in the kitchen while she prepared dinner. She even suggested they start a new tradition, an evening walk together after Margaret went to bed. At first, Carol remained cautious. He responded to her gestures with polite acknowledgement, but kept his guard up. His trust, once unwavering, had been shaken, and the memories of their recent struggles were not easily forgotten. One evening, as they walked through the neighborhood under the glow of streetlights, Carol finally voiced what had been weighing on him. "I'm trying, Michelle," he said, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "But sometimes I can't help but think about everything that happened. The distance, the coldness. It's hard to shake." Michelle stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression full of understanding. "I know," she said gently. "I know it's going to take time, and I'm not expecting you to just move on overnight. All I can do is be here, every day, showing you that I'm all in. I'll keep showing you, Carol, for as long as it takes." Her words struck a chord in him. For the first time, he saw not just her guilt, but her determination to make things right. He nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "That's all I can ask for," he said quietly. As weeks turned into months, small moments of connection began to rebuild their foundation. One night, Carol came home late from work to find Michelle waiting up for him with a cup of tea and a warm smile. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone genuinely curious. It was such a simple question, but it reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had always been his partner. Another day, Michelle surprised him by suggesting they recreate their first date. They went to the same diner, sat in the same booth, and laughed about how awkward they had been all those years ago. For the first time in a long while, Carol felt the walls he had built around himself start to come down. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when Carol questioned whether they could ever fully return to what they once had. But each time, Michelle met his fears with patience and reassurance. "I know I hurt you," she said one evening as they sat together on the couch, her hand resting on his. "But I love you, Carol, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Carol squeezed her hand, a small but significant gesture. "I believe you," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "And I love you too." In that moment, they both knew they were on the path to healing. Not perfect, but stronger for having faced their struggles together. The road ahead would require effort from both of them, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt hopeful about the journey. The following months felt like the dawn of a new chapter for Carol and Michelle. Their efforts to reconnect began to pay off as they gradually rediscovered the love and joy that had once defined their marriage. They both knew it wouldn't be an overnight transformation, but they embraced each small step as progress, cherishing the moments that brought them closer. One crisp Saturday morning, Carol stepped outside to find Michelle kneeling in the garden, her hands covered in soil. "What are you up to?" he asked, leaning against the porch rail with a mug of coffee in hand. "I thought we could plant some flowers together," she replied with a hopeful smile, holding up a packet of wildflower seeds. "It's something we used to love doing." Carol hesitated, his mind briefly drifting to memories of their earlier years. But Michelle's warm expression drew him in. Setting down his coffee, he joined her, rolling up his sleeves. As they worked side by side, exchanging stories and laughter, the garden became a canvas for their shared renewal. At one point, Michelle reached over to wipe a smudge of dirt from Carol's cheek, and he caught her hand, holding it for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "For what?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "For not giving up," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. Their bond continued to grow through shared experiences. On a whim, Michelle signed them up for a local ballroom dancing class, reigniting a passion they had both nearly forgotten. At first, Carol was reluctant, grumbling about his two left feet, but Michelle's infectious enthusiasm convinced him to try. During their first class, Carol accidentally stepped on Michelle's foot, causing them both to burst into laughter. "I'm going to need steel-toe shoes for this," she teased, leaning into him. By the third lesson, however, they moved with an ease and rhythm that reminded them of the nights they used to dance until dawn. The music seemed to bridge the unspoken words between them, bringing a new intimacy to their movements. Michelle didn't stop at dancing. She wanted to show Carol how much she valued him through thoughtful surprises. For his birthday, she orchestrated an elaborate party, inviting their closest friends and family to join in the celebration. The centerpiece of the evening was a recreation of their first date. She set up a mock diner in their backyard, complete with red checkered tablecloths, milkshakes, and even a jukebox playing their favorite old songs. When Carol arrived home that evening, he was stunned to see the backyard transformed. "What's all this?" he asked, his eyes widening as Michelle emerged, wearing a polka dot dress reminiscent of the one she wore on their first date. "Happy birthday," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "I thought it was time we relived one of my favorite memories." Throughout the evening, Carol couldn't stop smiling. He danced with Michelle under the string lights, the sound of their laughter mixing with the music. At one point, as they swayed to a slow song, he whispered in her ear, "You've outdone yourself. Thank you for making me feel so special." "You have always been special to me," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I just needed to remind myself, and you, of that." Not every moment was grand or dramatic. Many of their most meaningful interactions happened in the quiet routines of daily life. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching a movie, Michelle slipped her hand into Carol's. The simple gesture sent a wave of warmth through him, and he responded by kissing the top of her head. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes about their growing connection. Other times, Carol took the lead in showing his appreciation. Michelle had been asking him to fix the squeaky hinge on the pantry door for weeks, and one afternoon he finally decided to tackle the project. When she came home to find the door swinging silently, she smiled and kissed his cheek. "You're my hero," she said playfully. "Well, I couldn't let that door keep bothering my favorite lady," he quipped, earning a laugh from her. Huh. As their relationship deepened, they began to dream together again. One weekend, they planned a getaway to a lakeside cabin, leaving Margaret with Carol's parents. The quiet solitude of the lake allowed them to reconnect in ways their busy lives often didn't. They spent hours canoeing, hiking, and sitting by the fire, sharing stories about their hopes for the future. One night, under a blanket of stars, Carol turned to Michelle and said, "I don't think I'd tell you enough how much you mean to me. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Michelle, her eyes shining with tears, leaned in to kiss him. "You're my everything, Carol. I'll never take us for granted again." 2 years after their rough patch, their anniversary arrived, and Michelle planned a surprise dinner. She booked a table at the same restaurant where they had celebrated their first wedding anniversary. When Carol walked in, he was greeted by the sight of Michelle sitting at a candlelit table, her smile radiant. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" he asked, sitting across from her. "I've learned that it's the little things that matter most," she replied, taking his hand. "And you deserve all the little and big things I can give." As they toasted to their 14 years together, Carol felt a sense of peace and fulfillment he hadn't known in a long time. They had weathered storms, faced doubts, and come out stronger on the other side. Their love, once fragile, now felt unshakable, built on trust, understanding, and a shared determination to cherish every moment. That night, as they danced in their living room to a song they both loved, Carol whispered, "We've come a long way." Michelle rested her head on his shoulder, smiling, "And we're just getting started." One quiet evening, Carol and Michelle sat together on the couch, the flickering light of a movie playing softly in the background. Margaret had gone to bed, leaving them in a rare moment of calm. Michelle rested her head on Carol's shoulder, her fingers idly tracing patterns on his hand. Breaking the silence, Carol spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Michelle," he began, "I've been thinking. Our family feels stronger than ever now. I think it might be time for us to consider adding another member." Michelle lifted her head to look at him, her eyes widening slightly. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice tinged with both surprise and hope. Carol nodded, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "I am. I think we're ready. And Margaret? She'd make an amazing big sister." Michelle's eyes filled with emotion as she smiled back. "I've thought about it too," she admitted. "I just wasn't sure if you'd want to after everything we'd been through." Carol took her hand in his expression sincere. "What we've been through is exactly why I want this. We've come so far, Michelle. I want us to keep building this life together. And I can't think of a better way to do that than with another little one to love." Months later, on Margaret's 10th birthday, the family gathered in the living room, surrounded by balloons and the remnants of cake. Margaret was seated in the center, glowing with the excitement of the day, as Carol and Michelle exchanged a knowing glance. "Sweetheart," Michelle began, crouching down in front of Margaret, "your dad and I have a special surprise for you, something we think you'll be very excited about." Margaret's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "What is it?" she asked eagerly, leaning forward. "Well," Carol said, kneeling beside Michelle, "in a few months, you're going to be a big sister." Margaret gasped, her face lighting up. "Really? A baby? I'm going to have a little brother or sister." Michelle nodded, her smile widening. "That's right. Are you ready for the job?" Michelle nodded again. Margaret leaped into her parents' arms, hugging them tightly. "Yes, I'm so ready. I can teach them everything and we can play together and I'll help take care of them." Carol laughed, ruffling her hair. "I think you're going to be the best big sister ever." In the weeks that followed, the family began preparing for the new arrival. Together, they turned the spare room into a nursery, painting the walls a soft pastel color. Margaret eagerly helped with every step, from assembling furniture to choosing decorations. One Saturday afternoon, as Michelle sorted through baby clothes, Margaret stood in the middle of the room, holding a small stuffed bear. "Can this be their first toy?" she asked, her voice filled with pride. Michelle smiled, pulling Margaret into a hug. "That's perfect, sweetheart. They're gonna love it." As the months passed, the nursery filled with warmth and love, each item carefully chosen by all three of them. The family's laughter echoed through the house as they worked together, dreaming about the future. For Carol and Michelle, these moments were a reminder of how far they had come. Their family, once tested by challenges, now thrived in a way they hadn't dared to imagine. With Margaret's excitement and their shared hope for the future, they felt ready to welcome their newest member into a home filled with love, unity, and endless possibilities. The warm glow of the afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows as Michelle sat in her favorite chair, a soft blanket draped over her legs. In her arms, she cradled their newborn son, his tiny fingers curled around hers. Across the room, Carol and Margaret were on the floor, laughing as they built a tower of colorful blocks. The sound of their joy filled the space, a melody of love and connection that Michelle cherished deeply. As she watched her family, her thoughts drifted to the darker days they had endured. The painful arguments, the silent dinners, and the night Carol walked out. The memory of standing alone in their bedroom, staring at the empty closet where his clothes had been, still sent a pang through her chest. She had felt so lost, so afraid that she had destroyed the most important relationship in her life. But as quickly as the memory surfaced, it was replaced by the warmth of the present. She looked down at her son, his soft breathing a reminder of the life they had created together. "We made it," she thought, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Love isn't always easy," she murmured to herself, "but it's worth every fight, every tear, and every moment of patience and forgiveness." Michelle glanced over at Carol, who caught her eye and smiled, his expression tender. He got up and walked over, sitting on the armrest of her chair. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "About how far we've come," she replied, her voice soft. "There were times I wasn't sure we'd make it, but here we are, stronger, happier, and complete." End of poem. Carol reached out, placing his hand gently over hers. "I think about that too," he admitted, "and I'm grateful every day that we didn't give up. You gave me the chance to believe in us again, and I'll never stop being thankful for that." Michelle looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "You never stopped fighting for us, even when I made it hard. That's something I'll never forget, Carol. I promise I'll never let us drift apart again." Carol leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I promise to always talk to you, no matter how hard it gets. I've learned that love isn't just about the good times. It's about showing up, even when it's difficult." Later that evening, the family gathered in the backyard. Margaret raced across the lawn. Chasing bubbles Carol was blowing into the air. Her laughter rang out as she reached up, trying to pop them before they floated too high. Michelle sat on a picnic blanket with their baby, watching the scene unfold with a contented smile. Errol joined her, dropping down onto the blanket and lying back beside her. He rested his head on his hand, gazing at her with an expression of quiet joy. "This," he said, gesturing to their children, the soft breeze and the golden hues of the setting sun, "this is what it's all about." "You think everyone picks perfectly?" the belter asked, looking to be friendly at Carol. Michelle nodded, her heart full. "I used to think love was something that just happened, like magic. But now I know it's something you build, something you choose every day. And I'll keep choosing us, over and over." Carol took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Me too," he said simply. "Always." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the family sat together, Margaret leaning against Carol while Michelle gently rocked the baby in her arms. They didn't need words in that moment. The quiet unity they shared spoke volumes. Michelle glanced at Carol, then down at her son, her thoughts clear and resolute. "I will protect this love, this family, with everything I have. Because we've proven that even when love falters, it can grow back stronger than before. Carol broke the silence, his voice warm and reflective. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we went through what we did. It wasn't easy, but it taught me so much about love, patience, and what really matters. Michelle smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. I feel the same. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Every single moment. The baby stirred in her arms, letting out a soft coo that made them both laugh. Margaret leaned over, gently patting her brother's tiny hand. He's so little, she said, her voice full of wonder. Do you think he'll like playing with blocks when he's older? Carol grinned. I think he'll love it, especially if his big sister is the one teaching him. Margaret beamed, and Michelle felt a wave of peace wash over her. Their family wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, built on a foundation of love, forgiveness, and unwavering commitment. As they sat together under the darkening sky, the warmth of their connection enveloped them, a reminder that love, no matter how tested, could always find its way home.